For 30 years, there was one ritual that united America more than religion or politics. At 11:30 p.m., lights across the country would flicker on, and a familiar voice would announce, "Here's Johnny." Johnny Carson. He was the king of late night, the man who tucked America into bed. To the public, he was the ultimate Midwestern gentleman, charming, quick-witted, and safe. He was the friend you invited into your living room every single night for 3 decades. But what if I told you that the man you saw on screen was an illusion? When the cameras stopped rolling, the charm evaporated. Behind the curtain lay a complex web of darkness, coldness, and a voracious appetite for women that threatened to destroy everything he had built. While millions laughed at his jokes, his own family lived in the shadow of his volatile temper. And no one knew this better than Joanne Copeland, his second wife. She was the woman who lived through the height of his fame and the depth of his betrayal. For years, rumors whispered through the halls of NBC, whispers about secret apartments, illicit affairs with Hollywood starlets, and a double life that was carefully protected by a fiercely loyal entourage. Today, we are going back to the golden age of television to uncover the rusty reality underneath. We are examining the files, the court documents, and the heartbreaking revelations of the woman who finally said, "Enough." This is the awful truth Johnny Carson couldn't hide anymore. To understand the scandal, we first have to understand the man. Why did Johnny Carson have such an unfillable void that led him to wander? Biographers and psychologists point to one person, his mother Ruth Carson. She was a woman described as cold, withholding, and impossible to please. No matter how successful Johnny became, it was never enough. This created a man who was desperate for love but terrified of intimacy. He sought validation from millions of strangers because he couldn't get it from the one woman who mattered. When they met in the early 1960s, Johnny was a rising star but not yet a god. Joanne was a stunning stewardess, smart, independent, and possessing a fiery spirit that matched his own. They married in 1963, just a year after Johnny took over The Tonight Show. At first, they were the golden couple of New York. They attended the best parties, dined at the finest restaurants, and projected an image of perfect marital bliss. But as Johnny's fame skyrocketed, his ego grew with it. He wasn't just a TV host anymore. He was a cultural phenomenon. And with that power came a sense of entitlement. He began to believe that the rules of marriage, the rules of loyalty, the rules of mere mortals didn't apply to him. Joanne began to notice the change. The man she married was disappearing, replaced by the king. And the king had needs that he intended to satisfy regardless of the cost. By the mid-1960s, the Tonight Show studio had become Johnny's personal playground. It was an open secret in the industry. The guest chair wasn't just for interviews. It was a casting couch. Watch the old footage, you can see it. The way he looks at the actresses, the suggestive jokes, the double entendres. The audience laughed, thinking it was just a skit. But for Joanne, watching from their cold apartment, it was a nightly humiliation. Rumors began to circulate that Johnny was having affairs with some of the most famous women in the world. But it wasn't just the stars. It was production assistants, secretaries, anyone who caught the king's eye. Former employees have since whispered about the atmosphere backstage. When Johnny's dressing room door was closed, you didn't knock. He had handlers, men whose job wasn't just to manage his schedule, but to manage his secrets. They cleaned up the messes. They ensured that nothing leaked to the press. In the era before social media and TMZ, a powerful man like Carson could control the narrative completely. He had the newspapers in his pocket. He was making NBC too much money for anyone to dare confront him. Joanne was isolated. She was living in a gilded cage. She had the fur coats, the jewelry, the status. But she knew she was sharing her husband with the world in more ways than one. But intuition is a powerful thing. Joanne knew that Johnny wasn't just working late at the studio. The breaking point came when she uncovered the existence of a secret apartment. Johnny maintained a luxury apartment at the UN Plaza in New York. He told Joanne it was an office, a quiet place to write monologue jokes, to read books, to escape the noise of the city. It was a lie. According to reports and later biographies, this apartment was the epicenter of his double life. It was a bachelor pad in every sense of the word. Stocked with liquor, music, and the finest furniture, it was designed for seduction. This was the awful truth that he couldn't hide forever. It wasn't just a one-night stand, it was premeditated infidelity. He was paying rent on a facility designed to betray his wife. Joanne didn't just sit back and cry. She reportedly investigated. She needed proof. She knew that if she confronted the most powerful man on television without hard evidence, he would destroy her credibility. When she finally gained access or confirmed what was happening inside those walls, the reality was devastating. Personal items from other women. The scent of perfume that wasn't hers. The realization that her husband was living a completely separate life parallel to their marriage. When Joanne confronted Johnny, the mask of the nice guy fell off completely. You might expect a man caught cheating to beg for forgiveness, to cry, to promise he'd change. Not Johnny Carson. Witnesses and insiders suggest that Johnny became cold, almost clinical. He was furious not that he had hurt her, but that his privacy had been invaded. His narcissism wouldn't allow him to accept blame. In his mind, he was the provider, he was the star, and he deserved his indulgences. He treated the end of his marriage like a contract dispute. He stopped speaking to her directly and let his lawyers do the talking. He tried to bully her into silence. But he underestimated Joanne Copeland. She wasn't going to be discarded like an old prop. She had leverage. She knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. She knew about the drinking, she knew about the temper, and she knew about the women. The divorce battle of 1972 was a media spectacle. In a time when divorce was still scandalous, this was a blockbuster. Johnny was terrified that the sordid details of his bachelor pad and his affairs would be read into the public record. It could have ruined his family-friendly image. It could have cost him his throne. So he paid, and he paid dearly. The settlement was astronomical for the time. Joanne received nearly $500,000 in cash and art assets. But the kicker was the alimony, $100,000 a year for life unless she remarried. To put that in perspective, $100,000 in 1972 is equivalent to over $700,000 a year today. The media called it a victory for Joanne. Johnny called it extortion. But in reality, it was hush money. He was buying her silence. He was buying the preservation of his legacy. Joanne took the money, moved to California, and lived a quiet, dignified life. She never remarried, which meant Johnny had to write that check every single year until the day he died. It was a constant monthly reminder of his failure. You would think after such a painful and expensive lesson, Johnny Carson would change. He didn't. He married 2 more times, first to Joanna Holland and then to Alexis Moss. The same patterns emerged. The initial infatuation, the controlling behavior, the coldness, and the eventual isolation. Johnny Carson spent his life surrounded by people, yet he was the loneliest man in Hollywood. He could make 20 million people laugh, but he couldn't make one woman happy. Joanne Copeland passed away in 2015, 10 years after Johnny. In her later years, she rarely spoke ill of him. She held on to the good memories, the early days in New York before the fame became a monster. But her story serves as a cautionary tale. It peels back the veneer of celebrity worship. We often look at icons like Michael Jordan, Elvis Presley, or Johnny Carson and wish we had their lives. But we forget the collateral damage. We forget the awful truths that are hidden in the shadows of the spotlight. Johnny Carson left behind a legacy of laughter, but also a legacy of broken hearts. And thanks to Joanne, we know that the man who owned the night was in the end afraid of the light. What do you think? Was Johnny Carson a victim of his own fame, or was he a villain in his personal life? And do you think Joanne was right to demand such a high price for her silence? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark side of Hollywood history, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. We have many more secrets to uncover. Thanks for watching.